On North Korea, China is taking away with one hand and giving with another, says Quartz. North Korea conducts roughly 90% of its trade with China. So when the Chinese Customs Agency released its August trade data earlier this week, people looked closely for signs of how much pressure Beijing is really applying on Pyongyang, following the UN's harshest ever economic sanctions on the rogue regime. The official data show that China's trade with North Korea jumped in August to its highest level since December. A closer look at the breakdown of the August trade, which was released later on September 26, shows a mixed picture of the bilateral relationship. The main takeaway, while China certainly appears to be limiting trade of some products with its troublesome neighbor, it's also trying to keep the regime afloat, as it's simply not going to allow chaos on its doorstep. Things are very different when it comes to food. China's corn shipments to North Korea surged 4,600% in August from a year earlier, with almost all of its corn exports going to North Korea. And wheat exports jumped more than 50 times in the same period. And I wrote a piece in September, 18th of September, when I said it's unlikely that the West has anything to offer the Chinese that can compensate them for the loss of their hinterland, their buffer, and their instrument of attack. And so one of those myths is that Xi Jinping, with some cajoling, can be made to effect a clean break with Pyongyang. Consider that Pyongyang is a buffer state between China and the US, by that I mean South Korea, and that Pyongyang is in fact a near-perfect geopolitical attack dog. The attack dog is not on a Chinese leash, but it's surely aligned with a resurgent rising China whose aim is to surely eject the US and its allies from what it considers its sphere of influence. Just take a look at the South China Sea, where the US and its allies have largely capitulated, and the US is now left performing some half-hearted and quite forlorn FONOPs, freedom of operation, freedom of navigation operations. Once in a blue moon, North Korea, by lobbing those missiles over Japan, is seeking to prize Japan away from its US alliance, something that China is surely trying to achieve as well. When you look at geopolitical alignment, it is entirely unlikely, I said, that the West has anything to offer the Chinese that can compensate them for the loss of their hinterland, their buffer, and their instrument of attack. US military chief Durnford said China is the main threat to security. You don't say. We don't actually have the luxury of identifying a single threat today, unfortunately, nor necessarily to look at it in a linear fashion, he said. If I look out to 2025 and I look at the demographics and the economic situation, I think China probably poses the greatest threat to our nation by about 2025, and that's consistent with most of our analysis, he said. In 2000, we had a significant competitive advantage in our ability to project power when and where we needed to advance our national interests, Danford said. I can't say that today. We are challenged in our ability to project power, both to Europe and in the Pacific, as a result of those threats. Another piece I wrote, which was at the end of August, which was called China Rising, and I said Washington is metasized into an epicenter of risk. Donald Trump refers and talk of a unipolar, US-dominated world have largely evaporated. President Putin refused to be rolled over by a Victoria Nuland-inspired color revolution in the Ukraine and drew a line in the sand. And one of the collateral consequences of that was to send President Putin into the very ready embrace of Xi Jinping. In fact, far from being a unipolar world, we have entered a bipolar or even a tripolar world, the US, China, and Russia. And then I was talking about these timid FONOPs. I said China's established control over the South China Sea, artificial islands, militarized those same artificial islands, mind-boggling geopolitical advance any which way you cut it. I was talking about the Gwadar port in Pakistan, the Sri Lankan port they've taken control over, Djibouti, and I said the pivot to Asia, which was supposed to contain China, is dead in the water, and China has sprung that trap.